It was just after 7:40 in the morning when Maya pulled her aging silver SUV onto Route 63. The sun hadn't fully cleared the trees yet, and mist still hugged the shoulders of the road. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the contractions. They weren't close enough for panic yet, but they were real. And real was enough. The dashboard clock blinked in orange. Her hospital bag lay in the back seat. The front seat was empty, no husband, no mother, no one. Just her. She was 34 weeks pregnant. A bit early, but not unheard of. The baby had already dropped. Her OB told her last week she might deliver early, especially considering the stress. And Lord, there had been stress. Maya tried to focus. Her breathing was steady, her posture calm, her eyes on the road. But the weight of everything she'd carried for the past 9 months pressed harder than the child inside her. Then came the flashing lights. Blue. Red. Blue. Red. She saw them in her rearview mirror and blinked once, as if her mind hadn't processed what was happening. Her heart sank. Not now. Not like this. She flicked her blinker on, pulled gently over to the gravel shoulder, and placed the car in park. She rolled down the window slowly and set both hands on the wheel. She wasn't sure why her throat felt tight. Maybe it was the uniform she saw approaching in the mirror. Or maybe it was how life always found a way to twist at the worst moments. The officer stepped up. White. Tall. Late 30s maybe. Jaw clenched, lips thin. Sunglasses hid his eyes. His hand hovered near his utility belt, not threatening, but not relaxed either. License and registration, he said flatly, not even looking at her belly. Maya cleared her throat. Officer, I. License and registration, he repeated, firmer. Her fingers moved slowly to her purse, which lay on the passenger seat. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just, she inhaled slowly. I'm 34 weeks pregnant. I'm on my way to the hospital. The contractions aren't regular yet, but they've started. The officer didn't flinch. His tone didn't soften. You were doing 42 in a 30. School zone. Maya blinked. There were no kids out. And I didn't see a sign. Doesn't matter, he snapped. You're still responsible. Step out of the vehicle. Her stomach tightened, not from the contraction this time, but from the fear that began to crawl up her spine. Officer, I really can't. You're refusing a lawful order, he said, leaning down slightly now. You want me to call backup? I'm not refusing. I'm just trying to explain. Out. Of. The car. His hand moved closer to his radio. She saw it now, clearly. This wasn't about a ticket. This wasn't even about the speed limit. This was about control. And she knew that look. The one where you aren't being seen as a woman. Not as a human. Just a problem to manage. Slowly, painfully, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Her legs moved stiffly as she opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel. Her belly tilted forward. The contraction pulsed again, this one sharper. The officer took a step back, surprised now. It was as if her pregnancy had just registered. You said you're in labor? He asked, frowning. She nodded, bracing herself on the car. Then why the hell are you driving yourself? There it was. That tone. The one that blamed her before hearing the story. The one that assumed. Maya steadied herself and looked him in the eye. Because I don't have a husband. My mother's recovering from surgery. And I couldn't afford to call a car. But I could afford to drive myself. The cop's jaw tensed. He glanced down at her belly again. For a moment, he seemed unsure, caught between suspicion and reason. You got ID or not? He asked. Yes. She moved slowly, reaching back into the car, pulling out her wallet. She handed it to him with quiet resolve. He flipped it open, and then everything stopped. His posture shifted. His brows furrowed. His mouth opened, then closed again. Because the name on the ID didn't just say, Maya Johnson. It said, Maya Johnson, Department of Justice, Internal Affairs Division. And underneath it, her clearance level. And underneath that, her status as a federal investigator. The badge was tucked behind the license. He saw it when he flipped. His face turned pale. Maya didn't smile. She didn't say a word. She just watched. The officer looked at her again. Looked at her differently this time. "Ma'am," he said quietly, handing her ID back. "I wasn't aware." "You didn't ask," she replied calmly. "And now we both know what would have happened if I didn't have that badge." The officer looked down. His throat moved like he swallowed a dry stone. I'll let you off with a warning. Please drive safe." "Of course," she said, stepping slowly back into the car. She didn't slam the door. She didn't rev the engine. She didn't even look back. But as she pulled onto the road and re-entered traffic, something inside her shifted. She'd been quiet all her life. Avoided confrontation. Smiled politely even when it stung. But this time, she wasn't just driving to the hospital anymore. She was carrying something far heavier than a child. She was carrying the truth. And one day, she'd make sure the world heard it. She arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center just after 8:10 a.m. The automatic doors slid open slowly, as if even they sensed the weight of her moment. Maya moved carefully down the corridor, one hand on her lower back, the other clutching the hospital intake papers she'd pre-filled 2 weeks ago. No one knew about the stop. Not yet. But it echoed in her mind like a thunderclap. She could still see his face, the way it changed the moment he saw her ID. The sudden collapse of arrogance into fear. The realization that he'd nearly escalated a stop with someone who had the authority to investigate him. The irony burned inside her, not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew that thousands of women like her didn't carry badges. And they weren't shown mercy. A nurse with curly red hair met her near the nurse's station. "You're Maya Johnson?" "Yes." "Okay, we got your pre-admit forms. Let's get you to triage." She offered a gentle arm, guiding Maya into a quiet corner room. The fluorescent lights above buzzed lowly. The walls were painted a soft blue, almost trying too hard to soothe. Maya leaned back as monitors were hooked up. The nurse placed a band gently around her belly, then tapped the screen. "Contractions are about every 12 minutes, the nurse said softly. "You're not in active labor yet, but it's definitely early onset. We'll monitor you a bit before admitting you to a room." Maya nodded. Then closed her eyes. And breathed. It wasn't just about the labor. It wasn't even about the baby. It was about what had almost happened 40 minutes ago on a back road near Oak Ridge and how quickly life can shift between dignity and danger, depending on who's behind the badge. Her phone buzzed. She opened it slowly and saw a message from her supervisor. "You still on leave, or can I call you in for something small? Need someone who knows how to keep things discreet." Maya stared at the text for a long second before tapping out a reply. "At the hospital. But if it's urgent, text me details." Less than a minute later, her phone dinged again. A link appeared. Followed by a message. "Check this video. It's going viral locally. Recognize anyone?" Her brows furrowed. She tapped the link. A shaky cell phone video began to play, recorded vertically from a parked car across the street. The footage showed the officer. The very same one who'd pulled her over. Only now, he was screaming at a young black teenager. The teen's hands were in the air. He wasn't resisting. Wasn't yelling. He was just trying to explain himself. And the officer? Shouting. Threatening. Using words Maya had only ever read in incident reports. Not because they were rare, just because people rarely caught them on camera. The video cut off with a loud slap sound, unclear whether it was the officer slamming the car or worse. Maya's stomach twisted, not from contractions this time. From anger. This man didn't have a bad day. He had a pattern. She stared at the screen and felt something deeper wake up inside her. She tapped out a quick response, "That's the same officer who pulled me over this morning." Her supervisor replied immediately. "Can you file a formal report? We've had 4 complaints already. But this video might finally be enough to start a case." Maya looked down at her belly. Then back at her phone. And slowly typed. "I'll write it. Every word. But I'm not doing it quietly this time." The nurse stepped in a few minutes later, smiling gently. "Looks like we're moving you upstairs. Room 314. You ready?" "As I'll ever be," Maya said with a nod. They wheeled her through a side corridor to the elevator. Soft lullaby music played overhead as they passed the nursery windows. Inside, newborns slept under tiny blue and pink caps. Maya glanced through the glass, and her eyes stung unexpectedly. She didn't want her child to grow up fearing sirens. She didn't want her son or daughter to memorize where to place their hands during a traffic stop. Or practice how to lower their voice when speaking to someone in uniform. She wanted better. And that meant doing more. When she got to room 314, she eased into bed slowly. The contractions were still 12 minutes apart, but her thoughts came faster. Louder. Sharper. She opened her notes app and began writing. Not a formal report. Not yet. Just memories. She wrote what she remembered. His tone. His posture. The exact words he used. How he didn't ask if she was okay. How he assumed she was a problem. How his face shifted only after seeing that badge. By the time a new nurse checked on her, she had written over 1,000 words. Her fingers didn't slow. Not even when her back began to ache again. That night, after the contractions eased and her blood pressure stabilized, Maya turned on the hospital TV. And there it was. Local news, Channel 7. Controversy in Oak Ridge County tonight after a cell phone video shows a local police officer allegedly threatening a minor during a traffic stop. The video has already gained over 200,000 views on social media. The screen showed a blurred image of the officer's face. But Maya didn't need clarity. She knew that stance. That voice. That arrogance. A reporter continued. Sources say this isn't the first complaint against Officer Darren Kessler. Internal Affairs has now confirmed they've received multiple statements today, one of them from a federal-level investigator who claims she, too, was recently targeted by Kessler. Maya sat upright. They were already using her statement. Her truth. And this time, she wasn't afraid of who knew it. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about clearing space, for women like her. For voices like hers. For all those who couldn't flash a badge to avoid mistreatment. She took one last glance at her belly. Then whispered softly. I've got you. And I'll make sure the world gets you too. Maya was discharged 2 days later. Her labor had stalled, what the doctors called a false start. But in a way, it wasn't false at all. Something real had started that morning. Something that had nothing to do with contractions, and everything to do with conviction. She drove home slowly, the same route she'd taken to the hospital. This time, no flashing lights. No raised voices. Just the occasional car passing, the hum of her tires, and her own thoughts. She hadn't spoken to Officer Darren Kessler again. But he was everywhere now. By the time she pulled into her apartment complex, his name had trended on social media twice. The teen from the video, a 17-year-old named Jamal, had gone public with his story. His mother had given a statement too, tearful, furious. And Maya? Maya had done more than file a report. She had done something no one expected. She went on camera. One of her old contacts from DOJ Media Relations reached out, asking if she'd be willing to do a sit-down with a national outlet. She'd hesitated at first, but something in her gut told her it was time. So she said yes. And when the interview aired that same night, the reaction was electric. There she was. Maya Johnson. 8 months pregnant, steady-voiced, clear-eyed. Not angry. Just honest. "I didn't flash my badge to scare anyone," she'd told the reporter. "I didn't need special treatment. I just wanted to get to the hospital safely. But what I got instead was a reminder that, even now, how you're treated still depends on who they think you are. And what they think you look like." Her words spread like wildfire. And in homes across the country, people paused. Because her story wasn't just a news headline, it was a mirror. The following morning, Maya stood in line at her neighborhood pharmacy when a woman tapped her shoulder gently. "You're the one from the interview, right?" Maya turned, unsure what to expect. The woman was older. Latina. Maybe late 60s. Her hand trembled slightly as she spoke. "I watched it twice," she said. "With my granddaughter. She's 16. And I wanted to say thank you. For saying it out loud." Maya blinked. Then nodded. "Thank you for listening." She hadn't expected any of it, especially not the response from inside her own agency. Emails began flooding her inbox. Not just from media, but from within the Department of Justice. Agents. Investigators. Analysts. All writing variations of the same thing. "Thank you for speaking up. We've seen this too. You've given voice to what we couldn't say." But not everyone was supportive. There were others. Angry commenters online. A few anonymous emails. Even one from a retired officer who accused her of slandering the badge. Maya didn't flinch. Because this wasn't slander. It was sunlight. And sometimes the truth had to burn before it healed. A week after her hospital visit, Maya was summoned downtown for a formal briefing. The DOJ had officially opened an internal investigation into Officer Kessler's conduct. Maya was asked to attend, not as a witness this time, but as a federal liaison. She dressed carefully that morning. Not to impress. Not to intimidate. But to be seen clearly. Black slacks. Blue maternity blouse. Pressed blazer. Her badge clipped to her waist, not hidden this time. When she walked into the room, a dozen heads turned. Most knew who she was now. She sat across from a long mahogany table. 2 attorneys from Civil Rights Division. A regional director from Internal Affairs. And a representative from the city's police department, older, stiff, unreadable. The lead investigator started. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for being here. We've reviewed your statement and the corroborating footage. It aligns with previous complaints against Officer Kessler." Maya nodded. "Has he been suspended?" The IA director replied, "Placed on administrative leave. Pending outcome." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Still drawing a paycheck, then?" No one answered. She glanced at the police rep. "Would you like to say anything?" He cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson, we appreciate your service. And we respect your position. But I hope you understand, officers face a lot of pressure. Split-second decisions. High tension. Sometimes, mistakes happen. Maya leaned forward slightly. Calm. Controlled. I understand pressure. I've worked organized crime. I've de-escalated gun standoffs. I've been undercover with no backup. But I've never mistaken arrogance for authority. And I've never humiliated a pregnant woman because I thought I could get away with it. The room went quiet. No one interrupted. She continued. If that badge only works when people fear you, it's not a badge, it's a threat. She stood then. Her back straight. Her voice steady. I won't be quiet anymore. Not when I have a daughter coming into this world. She deserves better than silence. And with that, she left the room. Not angrily. Not loudly. Just, firmly. As she walked out into the sunlight, her phone buzzed. A new message. From someone she hadn't expected to hear from. Jamal. The boy from the video. His message was simple. Thank you for not letting them ignore me. She stared at the screen for a long second. Then smiled softly. Because the story wasn't over. Not yet. But it was finally being told. 2 weeks later, Maya stood on the steps of the Oak Ridge County Courthouse. The air felt different that morning. Not just warmer, but heavier. The kind of day where something important hung just out of sight. Maya stood still, one hand on her belly, the other adjusting the blazer over her shoulders. The contractions hadn't returned yet. But the fight inside her had only grown stronger. In front of her, reporters clustered like nervous birds. Microphones in hand, cameras balanced on shoulders. Some were national outlets now. The story had moved beyond just her. Beyond even Jamal. It had become a spotlight. And Officer Darren Kessler stood in the center of it. He was scheduled to appear for an internal review hearing that morning, required by department policy when multiple verified complaints were filed. It wasn't a trial. Not yet. But it was the first real step toward accountability. Maya hadn't planned to attend. But Jamal's mother had asked her to come. I don't think he'll talk if you're not there, she'd said. You make him feel like he's not just noise. So Maya had agreed. She stood now at the base of those courthouse steps, quiet, composed, unshaken. But not alone. Behind her stood Jamal. Wearing his best shirt, freshly ironed slacks, shoes that still squeaked a little when he walked. He wasn't used to being seen like this. But today, he would be. Ready? Maya asked, her voice low. He nodded. Yeah. I think I am. Inside, the hearing room was small and plain. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A row of department officials sat behind a long folding table. On the far side, Kessler. His uniform looked crisp. But his eyes didn't. They looked dimmer. He wasn't the same man who'd leaned into her car window demanding authority. Now he looked like someone watching his power bleed out in slow motion. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She sat behind Jamal, close enough for him to hear her breathe. When it was his turn to speak, the room shifted. He stood. Hands clasped tight. Voice shaking, but clear. He spoke of that morning. How the officer had followed him for 3 blocks before pulling him over. How his hands never left the steering wheel. How he said, "Sir," with every sentence. How he asked, calmly, what he'd done wrong. And how the answer he got was a slammed car door, a raised voice, and the threat of cuffs. I didn't yell. I didn't argue, Jamal said, eyes low. I just asked why. And he told me, don't act smart, boy. You think your skin makes you untouchable? There it was. Out loud. The words that had haunted him. The room fell silent. No one moved. Maya saw one of the board members glance toward Kessler, his jaw clenched. Jamal looked up. I recorded part of it. But not all. And if that other video hadn't gone viral, no one would have believed me. Then he sat down. The board adjourned to deliberate. 20 minutes later, they returned with their decision. Effective immediately, the lead officer said, Officer Kessler is suspended without pay pending full federal investigation. His badge and weapon will be surrendered. A pause. Further action to be determined following DOJ review. Maya exhaled. Not because it was over, but because the first wall had finally cracked. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Supporters. Activists. Curious onlookers. And when Maya stepped out, they clapped, not for her title, but for her truth. A local journalist rushed forward, mic extended. Ms. Johnson, do you have any comment now that the officer has been suspended? She paused. Looked straight into the camera. Yes, she said clearly. I want everyone watching this to understand, this wasn't just about me. I had a badge. I had backup. But most people don't. And they still deserve respect. They still deserve to get home safe. The reporter tried to ask more, but Maya gently stepped away. She didn't need to say anything else. She'd already said everything that mattered. That night, she returned home to find a letter in her mailbox. Typed. No return address. Just a single name at the bottom. Lieutenant Harold C. Madison. It was short. Just one paragraph. I retired from Oak Ridge PD in 2018. I trained Officer Kessler. And I failed. I should have caught the signs earlier. Your courage reminded me of the oath I once believed in. Thank you for not staying silent. HM. Maya folded the letter carefully. Set it on her nightstand. Then walked into the nursery. It was still unfinished, half-painted walls, crib pieces stacked in boxes, baby clothes folded neatly in baskets. She ran her hand over the side of the rocking chair. Her belly stirred. Another small kick. And in that moment, she felt it, something deeper than victory. A beginning. Because that's what this had always been about. Not punishment. But protection. Not revenge. But rebirth. She sat down in the chair, closed her eyes, and whispered to the baby inside her. You've already changed the world, and you haven't even taken your first breath. Maya stood in front of her hallway mirror, one hand resting on her stomach, the other on her badge. It had been 4 weeks since Officer Kessler's suspension. The federal review was in full swing, and Maya had submitted her final statement 2 days ago. The media storm had cooled slightly, but her name still circled in headlines, especially in justice-focused spaces. She hadn't asked for the spotlight. But she wasn't afraid of it anymore. Down the hallway, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. She picked it up on speaker. Agent Johnson? This is Marshall Fields from DOJ Washington. Just wanted to say, we read your statement. All of us. And we're not just investigating the officer. Maya blinked. What do you mean? There was a pause. We're opening a broader review into the Oak Ridge PD. It's not official yet, but if the internal data lines up with the complaints, you may have helped launch something much bigger than you expected. Maya didn't speak right away. She looked at her reflection again, still standing tall, even 8 months pregnant. Understood, she said. Keep me looped in. After the call ended, Maya sat down on the edge of her couch. Bigger than expected. It echoed in her mind. All she'd done, originally, was try to survive a traffic stop. Try to get to the hospital. Try to breathe through fear without showing it. Now, that quiet, restrained moment of dignity had rippled outward. She picked up a stack of letters from the coffee table. Dozens of them. Handwritten. Some from women who'd faced the same harassment. Others from high school students who said they showed her interview in class. One letter came from a mother in Georgia who wrote, "My daughter watched you and said, I want to be that strong when I grow up." Maya's hand went to her belly again. A gentle nudge from inside. The baby was almost here. And the world outside was shifting, just slightly, towards something better. Later that afternoon, she walked into the community center for the town's first ever Know Your Rights event. It wasn't government-run. It was hosted by a few local parents, a high school counselor, and a civil liberties nonprofit. Maya had agreed to speak. Nothing official, just a personal message. But when she stepped inside, she froze. The room was packed. Over 200 people filled the space. Jamal was there, sitting in the front row beside his mom. So were other teens, older citizens, and even a few officers in civilian clothes. When Maya was introduced, the room applauded, not like she was a celebrity, but like she was one of their own. She stepped up to the microphone, took a breath, and began. "I was 8 months pregnant when I was pulled over. I was calm, respectful. I followed every instruction. And still, he treated me like a threat. Why? Because he could. Because he thought no one would believe me." She paused. "I've worked cases involving trafficking, embezzlement, organized crime. But nothing has shaken me like the feeling I had that day. The feeling that, even with everything I'd accomplished, it still wasn't enough to protect me." Heads nodded throughout the room. "But what I want you to remember, is this: you don't have to be an agent to speak truth. You don't need a badge to be believed. You only need your voice. And someone willing to listen." The crowd fell silent. Listening. "I was lucky," she added softly. "I had that badge. That ID. That leverage. But not everyone does. That's why we're here." She ended the speech with something her grandmother once told her. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up, and doesn't move. When she stepped down, Jamal stood and hugged her. Other teens lined up after. Some just shook her hand. Some cried. One girl, no more than 12, whispered, "You remind me of my mom." And that night, Maya slept deeper than she had in weeks. No news alerts. No emergency calls. Just peace. But peace didn't last long. The next morning, her labor began. It started slow, tightness across her lower belly, growing steadily into undeniable contractions. She didn't panic. She calmly packed her bag, called her neighbor to drive her to the hospital, and sent one text to her supervisor. "It's time." They arrived at St. Mary's just after 10:30 a.m. And when the nurse at the desk saw her, she smiled wide. "Back again?" Maya laughed through a deep breath. "Yeah, this time for real." They wheeled her into a birthing suite. Bright windows, soft beeping monitors, sunlight pouring through white blinds. A nurse gently clipped the 4-line. Another dimmed the light slightly. And through the pain, the nerves, and the rush, Maya felt calm. Because this wasn't the beginning of her fear. This was the beginning of something else entirely. 12 hours later, her daughter arrived. Full head of hair. Strong lungs. Brown skin the color of courage. Maya held her close, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You'll never have to be silent in this world. Not while I'm in it." A few days later, a photo of them, Maya in a hospital gown, holding her daughter, was quietly posted by one of her colleagues to the agency's internal bulletin. Captioned only, "Justice has a new name." 3 months later, the headlines returned. But this time, they weren't about what went wrong. They were about what finally changed. Maya sat on the back porch of her apartment, the baby monitor beside her, a cool breeze drifting through the trees. She rocked slowly, her daughter asleep inside. The world around her had gone quiet for a little while. But her story hadn't ended. Not even close. That morning, the U.S. Department of Justice released its full report on the Oak Ridge Police Department. It was 147 pages long. But one sentence, repeated across news outlets and social media, stood out more than the rest. Systemic bias, disproportionately aggressive behavior, and lack of disciplinary oversight have directly contributed to community harm. And on page 7, her name. Special Agent Maya Johnson's personal testimony and corroborated footage were instrumental in launching this review. She hadn't set out to be a whistleblower. But here she was. Her quiet stand, refusing to accept humiliation, calmly standing her ground, had become the spark for something far bigger than she imagined. The report concluded with 15 recommendations. Mandatory de-escalation training. An overhaul of complaint handling. Independent civilian oversight. And a formal apology from the city to those affected. Including one delivered directly to Maya's door. It arrived via courier. A signed letter from the mayor, and another from the police chief. Alongside it, a formal commendation from the DOJ. Maya didn't smile. She read the words, closed the letter, and set it beside the baby monitor. Because the only recognition that mattered, was the tiny heartbeat asleep in the next room. The next week, Maya returned to work. Her maternity leave had ended, but the office didn't feel like it used to. Her co-workers looked at her differently now. Not with pity. Not even with awe. But with respect. The quiet kind. The kind earned by showing up when it matters most. She sat down at her desk. Photos of her daughter tucked neatly beside her monitor. She opened her email. A subject line caught her eye. Speaking invitation, National Symposium on Law Enforcement Equity. She opened it. They wanted her to be the keynote. She stared at the screen for a moment. Then typed. Yes. Gladly. She wasn't just a field agent anymore. She was a voice. And voices, when used well, don't just echo, they ripple. 2 weeks later, she stood before a crowd of nearly 800 in Washington, D.C. agents, police leaders, civil rights advocates, even members of Congress. The stage was large, but she wasn't nervous. She walked out slowly, paused, and began. I'm not here today because I wanted attention. I'm here because silence would have been easier, but not braver. A pause. I stood up not because I'm special. But because one day, my daughter will ask me what kind of world I brought her into. And I want to be able to look her in the eyes and say, I tried to make it better. She spoke for 22 minutes. There were no outbursts. No applause breaks. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when every word finds its mark. And when she walked off that stage, she wasn't alone. 3 young women, all in uniform, waited at the edge of the curtain. One of them wiped her eyes and said, "We joined because of you." That night, Maya sat in her hotel room, rocking her daughter to sleep in a small travel crib by the window. The city lights blinked below. Her daughter opened her eyes for a moment, then yawned, and curled back into her tiny blanket. Maya whispered, "One day, you'll know what we did. What you helped me do, just by being born." The next morning, she received one last email before her flight home. It was from Jamal. Now a freshman in college. Studying political science. "Hey Agent Johnson. Just wanted to let you know I'm running for student rep, thought you'd be proud. I'm not scared to speak anymore. You taught me that. Thank you." She read the message 3 times. Then replied. "I'm already proud. Go change everything. She closed her laptop, kissed her daughter's forehead, and stepped into the sun. Because this story? It was never just about what happened in a car on a quiet street. It was about what followed. About what happens when the world expects you to bow your head. And you decide to raise it instead.